In just 58 minutes, Eala completely smashes Coco Gauff, and the audience goes crazy. No one anticipated it. Not Gauff herself, not the supporters, nor the commentators. The energy was different from the first serve. Electric, colder, and sharper. Eala was conveying a message in addition to playing tennis. Every reply was met with fire, and every shot sliced through the air like a blade. Gauff's confidence gradually eroded as her rhythm broke. With each rally, the throng increased, their incredulity building into a shout. And silence gave way to commotion when the last ball crossed the finish line. The past had just been altered. Beneath that 58-minute masterpiece, however, is an unexpected tale of rivalry, pressure, and covert retaliation. Because sometimes the goal of domination is to disprove everyone rather than to gain power. There was silence prior to the eruption. Just before the game started, there was an odd, unsettling silence throughout the arena. Silence that seems to be a warning. Everyone was familiar with Coco Gauff, the world-conquering young prodigy who effortlessly carried the burden of expectations. A Grand Slam winner, a representation of the sport's future. And on the other side of the internet stood Alex Eala, who was calm, collected, unknown to some, and undervalued by many. She did not make headlines. She wasn't the most popular. However, she was the unanticipated storm. Eala had been quietly constructing something for months. She spent late nights watching match tapes, endured long training in the sweltering sun, and overcame times of doubt. She was born in the Philippines, where tennis is a passion rather than a promise. Where every failure feels personal and every success feels like revolt. Eala had been informed from the start that players from her region of the world don't succeed. Too small a stage, too far away, too few resources. However, she didn't want to rise to the top and disprove them. She felt she belonged there, which is why she wanted it. She now stood opposite from the lady who represented everything she was told she couldn't be on this court in the dazzling lights. Coco Gauff is a warrior on the court, the face of contemporary tennis, the audience favorite, and the sweetheart of endorsements. It was not meant to be a close game. One-sided betting lines were used. A simple victory was predicted by commentators. However, Eala had a quiet type of rage in her eyes when she moved to the baseline for her warm-up. She wasn't present to take part. She was there to assume control. Her coach murmured something that only she could hear in the corner of her team. Ignore her identity. Recall your identity. It was more than just counsel. Ignition was the cause. As they waited for Gauff's trademark enthusiasm to illuminate the court, the audience muttered restlessly. The cameras flashed. Reporters jotted down notes. However, Eala's first serve cracked like thunder because it was quick, clean, and exactly on the edge. Even Gauff appeared a little taken aback. Nobody was ready to believe the story that was revealed in that first game. Eala was not responding to Gauff's cadence. It was dictated by her. Every movement was planned, and every rally was measured. And within minutes, the tension began to change. The crowd used to celebrating Gauff's supremacy started to sense something new, uncertainty. There was a glint in Eala's eyes that seasoned admirers recognized. Nor arrogance, nor anxiety, simply attention so pure it seemed almost icy. And in that focus lay the story of every moment she'd been missed, every tournament she entered as just another name. This wasn't just a match. It was a declaration. As the opening set began, the crowd still believed in a comeback. They always did with Gauff. Her resilience was her legend. But in the air, there was a whisper that grew louder with every point. Who is this girl? By the time Eala broke serve for the first time, her shots had become statements. Every winner drew gasps, every rally ended with disbelief. She wasn't smiling, she wasn't celebrating. She was meticulous, concentrated, and locked in. Coco Gauff, famed for her fury and fight, suddenly seemed human. And in that first half hour, the balance of women's tennis felt like it was tilting. The silence before the storm began to vanish. The eruption was on its way. It began with a single rally. 41 shots of sheer disobedience. The kind of rally that defines momentum. The kind that alters everything you thought you knew. Coco Gauff has just lost her serve. She stood at the baseline, whirling her racket, attempting to slow down the rhythm that was slipping away. Across the net, Alex Eala's gaze never left her. No emotion, no smile. Just that still, steady fire. Gauff's signature power was evident in the first serve, which came in hard and blurred toward the corner. Deep to the backhand, Eala caught it perfectly. The back and forth, forehand, backhand, and cross-court lines followed. Neither was retreating. After every exchange, the audience gasped, as the tempo increased with each shot. Then it took place. Eala moved in, saw the angle coming, and smashed a forehand down the line with such force that it painted the baseline's edge. The tension was broken by the umpire's call. Eala, game. Something shattered in the air, the audience roared, and Gauff froze. That point altered everything, not just the outcome of a game. Coco appeared uncertain for the first time during the game. Her gaze darted to her box in search of comfort. Her instructor gave a slow applaud, but it was clear from his demeanor. This was not intended to occur. Eala, meanwhile, casually made her way to her chair and took a sip of water, her expression unreadable. Commentators attempted to explain it. One said, "Maybe Gauff is adjusting." Another murmured, "Eala's playing out of her mind." However, they were unaware that this was not a fortunate run. It was a tactic. Eala had studied Gauff. She was aware of the pressure spots. She didn't always choose winners. She waited until Gauff had little room to breathe, making mistakes and tightening the angles. Mostly there for Gauff, the audience started to get agitated. When Eala's winners struck clean, there were gasps, murmurs, and even apprehensive cheers. A quick exchange at 4-1 in the first set completely altered the mood. Gauff yelled in exasperation after missing a standard backhand and slammed the ball against the net post. The arena went silent when the umpire gave a warning. Eala simply looked aside, straightened her wristband, and made her way to the baseline without responding. Because it was now psychology rather than merely competence, that moment revealed to the world who was in charge. Gauff's facial expressions all contributed to Eala's serenity. Alex grew colder the more Coco attempted to energize herself. It was a startling contrast. The next few games went by like lightning, with one player chasing rhythm and the other controlling time. Eala's returns were brutal, precise, almost surgical, and her court movement felt effortless. When she broke for a 5-1, the crowd couldn't believe it. People began recording on their phones, capturing what felt like history unfolding in real time. One fan shouted near the front row, "Is this really happening?" By the time the first set ended 6-1, the story had completely changed. Words like dominant, thunderous energy were increasingly being used by commentators. She was aware that the match was not yet over, yet she never once smiled. Not until the very end. Gauff attempted to reset during the second set. A few good serves, a slower tempo, and deep breaths. However, momentum is an odd concept. It is difficult for it to return after it has shifted. And the spark had already become fire in Eala's eyes. Gauff's annoyance flared up once more by the fourth game. Eala's forehand touched the edge as she questioned a line judgment. Gauff yelled, "Out." The umpire decided against it. Tension was in the air as the crowd jeered. Eala only nodded and got ready to serve once more. The illusion was totally shattered at that time. It wasn't a coincidence. This was sheer, systematic, inexorable dominance. The audience rose once more, half in shock and half in appreciation, when Eala held service with an ace down the tee. Since the young woman from Manila wasn't competing against Coco Gauff at the time, she was rewriting the story in real time, one game at a time, one comment at a time. She was competing against all the doubts she had ever encountered. And it appeared as though she was winning for the first time. The atmosphere in the arena had drastically altered at the beginning of the second set. What had started out as a golf-friendly group had evolved into something else. Something energetic, wild, and erratic. After each point, the sound of incredulity reverberated. The collective idea, "This can't be happening," was practically audible. Eala had already broken serve once again and was up by a set. Her self-assurance had evolved into control, which was now perilous. It was subdued domination. Every motion felt deliberate. Each rally concluded precisely. She merely turned, straightened her cap, and strolled back to the baseline without celebrating, yelling, or pumping her fist. The crowd erupted even louder because of the calmness and silence. Coco Gauff finally roared after a rare victory at 2-0. In an attempt to capitalize on the commotion, she waved her hands in the direction of the stands. The audience gave a response. Energy, chants, and cheers. Eala didn't flinch even though it seemed like the tide would turn for a brief while. She served wide on the very next point, dragged Gauff off the court, and ended with a crisp forehand into the open area. 9 seconds passed during the rally. The audience let out a gasp. Then one portion of the upper rows began to chant, albeit softly at first. Eala! 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 At the stands, it became louder and realized she was no longer the only person in the crowd. The slump following each point loss. Eala responded with something sharper, quicker, and crueler each time she attempted to rally. In the middle of the game, social media started to buzz. Videos of Gauff's failed backhands and Eala's deft forehands swamped TikTok and X. This girl, who is she? One tweet was read. Another, Eala is acting as though she has something to prove, and she is doing just that. Eala's Gauff was popular by the middle of the second set. During the broadcast, shocked commentators muttered, "This is one of the most dominant performances we've seen against Coco Gauff in years." The anxiety had spread throughout the world and was no longer limited to the court. Gauff double-faulted at 4-1. She tossed back her head, clearly frustrated, as the crowd moaned. Calm as ever, Eala served once again after bouncing the ball 3 times. One more ace. 1. The crowd erupted. Some people were cheering, while others were stunned, as cameras moved across their faces. Eala's crew remained silent in the player box, watching her every move with their hands folded. Before the final game, they were aware of what was about to happen. Coco Gauff is serving to keep the game going. Shouting her name and pleading for a miracle, the crowd stood up. However, Eala's homecoming was brutal. Miracles don't happen on demand. Coco battled error in a deep, hefty, and relentless manner. Point of match. Quiet. The serve arrived in the center of the box. A swirl of color and sound, Eala's forehand tore over the court. The line was cut by the ball. Excellent. Eala, game, set, and match. Time appeared to stop for a moment as the words reverberated. An eruption followed. The stadium as a whole roared. With their phones raised and voices piercing the din, fans jumped out of their seats. For a little while, Eala remained motionless while gasping for air and gazing at the scoreboard. The 6th hour lasted 58 minutes. Coco Gauff approached the net and extended her hand. Eala responded to it with quiet respect, no smirk, and no haughtiness. However, the flicker in Gauff's face, the annoyance concealed under her sportsmanship, was captured by the cameras. The noise followed Eala as she left the court. As if they were watching the birth of something historic, the audience yelled her name. She looked back once, not at Gauff, but at the actual event. Long after Eala had vanished down the tunnel, the sounds of the crowd continued to reverberate throughout the arena following the game. Everyone felt as like they had just experienced a brief, unexpected, and unavoidable minor earthquake. With a towel covering her head, Coco Gauff sat by herself on the bench, taking in what had just transpired. For a player accustomed to mastering every beat and story, this defeat was more than simply a setback, it was unbelievable. Clips from the game quickly went viral on social media. Slow-motion replays of Eala's cross-court shots, side-by-side comparisons of their reactions, and TikTok edits of her forehands all repeatedly loop. 58 minutes was the caption that went viral. No compassion. On X, fans quickly became split. Eala was hailed by some as a future superstar who restored accuracy and bravery to women's tennis. The other described the performance as being too cold, too clinical, and even rude. Gauff supporters attempted to justify dominance because it always causes unease when it is unexpected. She appeared worn out. She's conserving energy for the upcoming occasion. However, everyone understood in their hearts that this had nothing to do with exhaustion. It has to do with control. Gauff mustered a grin during her press conference following the game. She turned on the lights. Today, I was unable to find my groove. Her eyes, however, sent a different message. Close, far away, still taking in what had happened. She wasn't upset with Eala. She was upset by the helplessness that all athletes experience when their greatest efforts are insufficient. Then Ella arrived. Calm, modest, and a little taken aback by the attention. She spoke softly at first. All I did was try to play my game. Coco is someone I greatly admire. She is among the best. This score surprised me. The noise was simply made louder by that humility. Every phrase and every expression was analyzed by commentators. Did she just minimize one of the season's biggest surprises? A reporter inquired. Another said, no. She simply demonstrated maturity above her years. However, there were rumors backstage, the kind that stir up controversy. There were rumors that Gauff had left without fully addressing Ella. Some said their handshake was icy. In a brief video clip, Ella turned to face the stands and raised her hand to the audience as Gauff hurriedly left the court. It turned into a storm at that moment. Sportsmanship or shade is one of the headlines. After Ella's historic victory, Gauff leaves. Is a new rivalry emerging? Fans took sides, debates erupted in comment sections, and hashtags like #TrastOurTeamEala and #TrastTeamGauff concurrently trended on the internet. Analysts began posing awkward queries in the meanwhile. Was the torch being passed? Was it just one terrible day, or was Gauff's confidence damaged? Above all, was Eala prepared for the attention she had just earned? Crowds flocked to public courts and shopping centers in Manila to celebrate. Kids wore headbands with marker-drawn AE initials. It was dubbed the greatest Filipino victory in modern tennis history by local media. Her youth coach stated in an interview that she consistently promised to defeat the finest one day. I simply didn't anticipate it happening that quickly. However, the outcry continued. Eala's celebration was criticized for being overly composed and for lacking emotion. Others said that by loudly applauding Eala's winners, the audience was insulting Gauff. Eala didn't react to any of it, even though it seemed like domination itself had turned into a criminal. The following day, she worked out in silence, concentrated, and unfazed. The storm outside didn't matter to her. She knew, thus the only sound that mattered to her was the ball's bounce on the court. The hype and noise would subside. However, history would remember. Like any noise, the sound ultimately subsided. The headlines changed, the memes slowed, and the flurry of opinions began to subside. However, a different type of truth emerged in the ensuing quiet. The victory of Alex Eala wasn't a coincidence. Neither Gauff's performance nor the day were fortunate. It was the outcome of months of subdued development. A tale of obsession lay behind the cameras and the widely shared videos. Before the game, Eala's squad spent weeks studying Gauff's routines. Each serve angle, footwork rhythm, and emotional cue. They developed a patience-based technique. Coco should swing first, attack, and then counter when the opportunity arises. It was tactical genius masquerading as poise. However, belief, rather than strategy, was what really set Eala apart that evening. She didn't consider herself the underdog for the first time in her fledgling career. She entered the court expecting to win rather than hoping. Later, she told her coach in private, I didn't play to surprise anyone. To remind myself that I belong here, I played. Because it was the crux of what spectators had seen, a player stepping into her identity, those remarks would reverberate through sports media for days. To her credit, Coco Gauff dealt with the loss in the days that followed with poise. Losses like that remind you, she remarked in a subsequent interview. Someone is always working just as hard, if not harder, than you. It's inspiration. She grinned, but there was weight in her voice. It was resolve clothed in respect. The tone of analysts also started to change. Some described it as a shift in power, while others described it as the start of a new rivalry. Alex Eala's name was no longer followed by an asterisk for the first time. No more potential, no more emerging star. She had made it, but every success brings with it a different kind of strain. Despite all the commotion, she managed to maintain her composure. She didn't remark on the debates or share victory speeches. Rather, she sent a single message on social media, "Thank you for believing." There was still more work to be done. Easy, modest, yet strong. Because the reality of that 58-minute devastation was transformation rather than only dominance. The invisible boundary between potential and power has been crossed by Eala. Who is she from? How far is she capable of going? One thing became evident as the tennis community continued to conjecture. The spectacular match wasn't the conclusion of a tale. It marked the start of a legacy. Even after several weeks, people continued to discuss it. The shock lasted 58 minutes. What had started out as a standard tournament encounter had become an amazing encounter. The kind of performance that changes a sport's unspoken rules. That night was more than just a triumph for Eala. It was an identity change. She was the underdog when she entered that court, and left as a symbol. Suddenly, every young athlete from Madrid to Manila had a new moniker attached to their aspirations. She had become evidence that strength can come from anywhere, that faith can transcend boundaries, and that tennis isn't only for the select few. Coco Gauff also contributed to the strength of the narrative. The loss did not cause her to vanish or fall apart. Rather, she welcomed it and turned it into fuel. She gave a straightforward answer when questioned about Eala weeks later. "That girl is unique. When we get together again, I'll be prepared." There was only resolve, two pathways that would inevitably intersect again, instead of resentment. The game was dubbed the Manila Miracle by sports historians. The statistics were continuously analyzed by analysts. People continued to discuss it. The shock lasted 58 minutes. What had started out as a standard tournament encounter had become an amazing encounter. The kind of performance that changes a sport's unspoken rules. That night was more than just a triumph for Eala. It was an identity change. She was the underdog when she entered that court, and left as a symbol. Suddenly, every young athlete from Madrid to Manila had a new moniker attached to their aspirations. She had become evidence that strength can come from anywhere, that faith can transcend boundaries, and that tennis isn't only for the select few. Coco Gauff also contributed to the strength of the narrative. The loss did not cause her to vanish or fall apart. Rather, she welcomed it and turned it into fuel. She gave a straightforward answer when questioned about Eala weeks later. "That girl is unique. When we get together again, I'll be prepared." There was only resolve, two pathways that would inevitably intersect again, instead of resentment. The game was dubbed the Manila Miracle by sports historians. The statistics were continuously analyzed by analysts. 18 winners, 4 aces, and just 6 unforced errors in 58 minutes. However, the events of that evening could not be adequately described by numbers alone. Because Eala's actions went beyond simple execution. Energy was at issue. She entered without fear and left a lasting impression. Every sport has a turning point that separates the time before and after. Eala was a prospect before to this game. She was a presence after that. She had written a new story, one that was all her own. But despite all the commotion and media attention, she remained unchanged. Quiet purpose, no self-congratulations, no spectacular interviews. Days later, she answered a young fan's question on how she maintained her composure under pressure at a local event. "Because my entire life, I've already been undervalued. What is there to be afraid of?" Not because it was loud, but because it was true, that line became viral once more. Eala had transformed humility into strength and undervaluation into fuel. The legacy of that evening is still being written. The world's realization that greatness doesn't always reveal itself is a recurring theme in every highlight reel, replay, and argument. Occasionally, it enters silently, seizes control, and leaves everyone speechless. Perhaps this explains why supporters continue to get chills while watching that game. Because of what it represented, not because of the score. It was more than a mere 58-minute devastation. It was the beginning of faith. Careers are defined by some moments, while periods are defined by others. Was this the start of a new rivalry that would influence women's tennis for years to come, or was it merely an upset? Please share your thoughts in the comments section. Click like, subscribe, and stay tuned if that 58-minute lesson gave you shivers. Because the next eruption in this sport could occur at any time.